And welcome back to Racing Rundown. This is going to be a video that I've been very excited to make for a little while now. And this is going to be a look at the races on the night of the Dubai World Cup Carnival. If you remember back to last year, I did a major Dubai World Cup preview. Now, unfortunately, given the time that I am going to have for this particular year, it's not going to be able to happen that way. But I'm going to compromise and sort of add on to what I did last year, and I'm going to do an entire preview of the World Cup night races, or at least just the thoroughbred races, and go through them in sort of a view from 15,000 feet, but also talking about the horses that I like specifically and giving some of the upsides for them and give you, I'm not going to necessarily make specific picks, but there's a couple of horses, and these are big fields. So there's a couple horses that I've highlighted that I would say those are ones that I would personally play. If I were in the position. I'm not sure that I'm going to play all these races. I'll indicate which one of the couple that I bring up I like the most, but I'm hoping to give a couple more horses because these are bigger fields, or at least a couple more horses than we normally do. So, of course, those races are in order from race number 2, which is the Godolphin Mile, all the way through to the feature race, which is the Dubai World Cup. And as I said, this is going to work out, this is going to be a little different from how we normally do things, just because I don't have the time, and these are larger race fields than normal, so we're not going to have the time to go through all of them. I will mention I'm going to be using Racing Post through the majority of this, so that's where the odds are coming from, the best ones in there. But we'll start with race number 2, which is the Godolphin Mile, and I already mentioned we're not going to do the Arabian race on this card, but we are going to do the remainder of the thoroughbred races. So taking a look at this race, the horses that are favored right now in the markets, obviously Bathrat Leon, the winner of this race last year, won the Riyadh Turf Sprint last time out, or the 1351 Turf Sprint in Riyadh last time out. Isolate, who has come over to the Middle East from running with Tom Amoss in the United States last year, Discovery Island, and Prince Eg. Those are the 4 horses right now in the market. There wasn't anybody further down that I was overly a fan of. Everfast is a horse that since he's come over, I've thought, okay, he's been prices in his past few races, or in not even his past few races. He's been prices in his races there, and he showed some dirt form, but he's just hasn't really put it together that much in the Middle East overall. So while I have thought about him in the past, I didn't really consider him here. I'm also not the biggest fan of Bathrat Leon, just because Bathrat Leon, he kind of won this race by circumstance, I would say, last year. So I'm looking against him here in this spot. I know he won the 1351 last time out in Riyadh, but that was a turf race, and that is completely separate from what's going to be going on here. So I'm looking away from him. This is a race where I actually have a very strong opinion, though, and that's Discovery Island for Bufat Seymour and James Doyle. This is a horse who last time out won the, I believe it was the Burj Nahar. I lose track of the races on this carnival. He won the Burj Nahar by a length and a half, and that was over this trip, a mile, obviously this race course. 2 back, he lost to Prince Eg in another Group 3 race, the Firebreak Stakes, and I do have to mouse over to find the names, because like I said, I do mix these up. But Prince Eg in that race, and it's worth mentioning, that was a muddy track, and Discovery Island was in behind horses taking kickback, so I don't really think he got the surface there. 3 back, he was second behind Algiers, who we'll get to when we get to the Dubai World Cup in the first round of the Al Maktoum Challenge. Then, going all the way back to March of 2022, was a winner at Jebel Ali, going 7 furlongs. And then even further back, a couple of good races, a second in a handicap, and a first in there was probably a conditions or an allowance race. It was a conditions race at Meydan in January of 2022. So Discovery Island is carrying some really good form into this race, and I think he makes a lot of sense here. Right now, 8-1 in the markets is very reasonable, so I like him in this spot, and this is a race where I do have a strong opinion, and it's going to be Discovery Island. So on Racing Rundown, I will be selecting Discovery Island here, and Discovery Island is the horse that I like in this race. We'll move on now to race number 2. That's the Dubai Gold Cup. Siskany right now 7-2 is the favorite. He was 10-3 at some points, but whenever I've opened this up, I haven't seen him at something other than 7-2. I'm not crazy about him at 7-2 though. I'll take a look at him, but he's not going to be one of the 3 horses that I'm looking towards in this race. Now, last time out, he won the Not All Sheba Trophy going 1 3/4 miles, and he beat Articon there. Articon, you might remember him from running in the Jockey Club Derby in New York last fall. Start before that, he was beaten 3rd at Kempton, and then beaten 3rd in a Group 1 in Munich. I believe that was the Prix Van Bayern there. Both of those starts were going 1.5 miles though. And we go all the way back to, you'd have to go back to the Red Sea Turf last year in Riyadh, and actually that wasn't the Red Sea Turf, you'd have to go back to the Nome Turf Cup. I might actually be mixing those races up. I'm going to check. Yeah, it was the Red Sea Turf that he went further than 1 3/4 miles. Now, that was 1.7 miles, so not quite as far, but relatively similar to this. But there's a couple other horses who I think are better proven at this trip, and I'm going to look past Subjectivist, the Gold Cup winner, both Gold Cup winners actually. He won this race, but when I say Gold Cup, I'm sure you know what Gold Cup I'm talking about. Certainly needed the start last time in the Red Sea Turf, and it's quite possible that he could improve, but I'm going to be looking away from him in this race. There's 3 horses specifically, and I apologize for that again, that I'm going to be looking towards: Quickthorn, Givolato, and El Habib. I'll start with Quickthorn because I want to do El Habib and Givolato together with each other. So Quickthorn, 5th last time out at Ascot on Champions Day, beaten by Trueshan and Coltrane. Start before that, beaten by Kyprios at Longchamp on Arc Weekend. That race specifically at Longchamp, first of all, a little bit farther, 2.5 miles. I'm tossing that. I'm not tossing it because of the distance there. I'm tossing it because of the surface there. That was a boggy surface that nobody outside of Kyprios was really getting over. Kyprios won the race by 20. It's ugly. It was an 18-length gap away, so it was Kyprios in front, and then it was 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, all kind of within a length and a half to each other. And then it was another 18 lengths back to Quickthorn. So definitely not a great run from Quickthorn there, but I kind of have to toss that race out. And if we go back to even further, this is a horse who's on a very nice streak of races to begin from the beginning of 2022 into that race on Arc Weekend. This is a horse who won the Lonsdale Cup at York over just a bit farther than this. Start before that, one going 1.6 miles, also at Longchamp, over much fairer going, and then 3 starts back at Sandown, was a winner going this 2-mile trip, and then was beaten ahead by Princess Zoe at Ascot going back to April, by just ahead, and Princess Zoe, Group 1 placed mare 2nd in a Gold Cup at one point. So Quickthorn, I know he gets this trip, and that's my big thing with this race, is I want a horse that I'm absolutely rock solid on can get the trip. He also picks up Oisin Murphy, which, no disrespect to Tom Marquand, but Oisin Murphy, former champion jockey, certainly not a bad sign to pick him up. And my big thing is that I want a horse that I'm rock solid on can get the trip. Now, I want to talk about Givolato and El Habib, because these are 2 horses that I'm kind of going to group together in this race. These are both 3-year-olds who ran in classics last year. Givolato jumped up into the Ledger from running in handicap competitions. His prep before the Ledger was a 5-length victory in a Newmarket handicap race in August. And then he ran a strong 4th in there while being interfered with by Haskoy, and was subsequently moved up after Haskoy was taken down. So, I thought it was a good run from Givolato in the Ledger, but the question, you're a little bit concerned about that because the quality of the Ledger hasn't been the greatest. Eldar Eldarov certainly did not show to form running in the long distance cup on Champions Day. But I also want to group El Habib in here. El Habib was a horse that you might remember ran in the Derby in June last year while he was still a maiden in his second career start. And he was very much in over his head in that spot. Connections got a little bit more realistic, gave him a couple of starts after a break, and he was second at Chester in a maiden, and then won a novice stake over the all-weather surface in August, and that was his springboard into the Ledger. Ran okay in the Ledger, wasn't great, certainly an improvement off of his form from Epsom, but not a terrible race. But the reason that I'm looking to him is, and I'm including him in with this, is because I thought both him and Giavolato ran a really good race in the Noel Merlis, going 1 mile and 6 at Ascot last time out. That was a little bit further back, so it's a little bit longer of a break for these two than it is for Quickthorn, and that was also over not quite as far as this 2 mile trip, which is why I prefer Quickthorn a little bit to these two. All three of them have the layoff, and Quickthorn doesn't have the better recent form that these two have, but the way that it was looking at towards the end of the races, they were both staying on, and they both put pretty sizable distance between the rest of the field that they were moving away from in that race. So I think that that was a potentially strong race to springboard for these two horses, these two 3-year-olds, now newly minted 4-year-olds. One thing also about this is we look at the price. Siskany, who I don't love, 7-2. We go down Giavolato and Quickthorn, 20-1. El Habib, 25. So you're definitely getting a break in the price with these horses. So that's where I'm at with the Dubai Gold Cup. We'll move on now to race number 3, which is the Al Quoz, the first of the Group 1s on this card. I'll start with the favorite Al Dassim. This is a 3-year-old who's running for George Bowie and Mikel Barcelona. He has won the 3 races leading up into this race, including last time out when he beat Elders in the Not Al Sheba. I think he was probably also facing Elders in the other one, but in the other 2 races, but those were a couple of conditions races. Jumped up into that very nice victory while winning the Not Al Sheba Turf Sprint. So he brings some very strong form into this race. You even go back to some of his runs. As a 2-year-old in the UK, they weren't terrible. Certain, I don't know how far this form can take him, and it is a tough ask to ask him to go up against Group 1 competition level as a 3-year-old, but it was certainly nice for him. Al Suhail is the Charlie Appleby William Buick representative for this race. This was a horse that was beaten, or that actually beat, I should say, Al Farik, the winner of the Jebel Hatta, who we'll talk about a little bit later, going 7 furlongs in a Group 2 back in January, and then won at conditions, also going 7. My concern with him is he needed most of that 7 furlongs to win the conditions race that he ran, and then also if he was a Group 1 caliber, if this was a race that I'm concerned as to why he wasn't in the Not Al Sheba as a better prep into this race than that conditions race going 7 would be. So Al Dassim makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to look away from him again because there's a couple of horses exiting Riyadh that I want to mention. The first is Happy Romance. Happy Romance has been a very hard-knocking mare the last few years. She was 2nd in this race last year and 3rd in the Riyadh Turf Sprint of the 1351 behind Songline and Casa Creed. This year, she was 4th, but she was beaten by Casa Creed and Bathrat Leon. And then the other horse that I want to mention in this race, which is Raid. Raid is coming off of a 3rd place effort in that, so even further, if you like Happy Romance, which I do, even further of a reason to like Raid. This is a horse who, his start before that, ran on the dirt in Riyadh, in the Riyadh Dirt Sprint, which was a prep into, or not even a prep, this was 2 years ago, so that was off of a very sizable break, I should say, and I guarantee you the form chart isn't complete on Raid, but point is the run last time out was very good for him, and I should have figured this out before I went into doing this, but I guarantee you the form chart's not complete on Raid, but Raid and Happy Romance both ran very credible races underneath. Now, the concern would be certainly they're cutting back a furlong in trip, and I am concerned about that, but not necessarily the case for Happy Romance, because Happy Romance has been able to run at 6 furlongs fine before. She was only beaten 2 lengths in the July Cup, in the Platinum Jubilee at Ascot, which was a race where there was a bunch of bunching right towards the end of the race there. So Happy Romance probably will be a horse that I will look to play because she is going to be the value in the race. Al Dassim is going to be tough. I don't really like Al Suhail. in this spot. So that's really where I'm at with this Al Quoz. We'll move on now to the UAE Derby. This race right now, Cairo is favored, very strong favoritism on him, and I think it makes a lot of sense. He's coming into this race very similar to the way Aidan O'Brien's other UAE Derby runners have come in before. He won the Patent Stakes in Ireland last time out over the all-weather there. Start before that was a winner in a Group 3 at Leopardstown, and then before that was also second on the all-weather there. So he's got dirt form. He's bred by Quality Road. He's out of a Galileo mare. So those factors make a lot of sense when it comes to Cairo. And I also will say from a sentimental standpoint, I want Cairo to make the Kentucky Derby, because I think if Cairo makes the Kentucky Derby, Frankie Dettori will ride, and I would love to see Frankie Dettori win a Kentucky Derby in his final career season. But there's other horses that I want to look at specifically in this race. I'll take a look first at Goriiko, who is coming off of a bit of a break, but he is 2 for 2 in his 2 starts in Japan. There's also several runners coming out of the Saudi Derby, and I'm going to take Dermasotogake is going to be the one that I say of the horses coming out of the Saudi Derby, and I actually like him a bit more than I like Cairo. I respect the favoritism for Cairo, and I'm also rooting for Cairo to win because I want him to be in the Kentucky Derby. But Dermasotogake ran third, beaten only 2 lengths there at Riyadh. This is a very weird configured track that Riyadh track is. It's a 1-turn mile that was very favoring, that particular race was very favoring to the 2 speed horses there. Dermasotogake, I think, needs a little bit further than this. Breeding may not suggest that, but I think the way that he ran in Saudi Arabia indicates that he needs a little bit further here. He's going to get further, and I think if you had given him a mile and 3/16, which he's going to get in this spot, in that Saudi Derby, I think that you would have been able to get a victory out of Dermasotogake there. So Dermasotogake is going to be my selection in there. I'll talk also a little bit about Worcester. I don't love Worcester just because Worcester was beaten third by Newgate in the Bob Lewis, and he was there was a couple other races where he was beaten, and he's still a maiden. And I talked about this with Jay Privman last week on the Kentucky Derby show that I did with him. Why is this horse running in Dubai, and why is he still with Bob Baffert if this is a horse that, if we're playing devil's advocate here and saying that this is a horse that the connections think has real Kentucky Derby chances? So I'm going to stay away from Worcester here. I would expect in this market he will take a lot of play. I'm also going to stay away from the 2 Doug O'Neill entrants in this race. Tall Boy's coming out of a win in the UAE Guineas. I don't think that the form, or I don't think that the UAE Guineas and the 3-year-olds that have been running in the local races at Maidan are that strong. I think that this race is going to run through Japan and Aidan O'Brien. But Dermasotogake is going to be my big choice in this spot. Move on now to the Golden Shaheen, and this is a race that has shifted in favoritism a little bit. If I had done this video earlier in this afternoon, I'm recording this Wednesday night. If I had done this earlier in the afternoon, Gunite would have been favored at 3-1 with Lemon Pop, the second choice, at 7-2. Things have changed now. Lemon Pop is 4-1. Gunite is 5-1. And Lemon Pop is a horse that I like a lot based on his form, but I'm concerned about the trip for him because I think that this is a horse that he hasn't gone 6 furlongs before, and I think that this is a horse who's been running his last races like he's a 7 furlong sprinter, and we have those horses here in the United States that are 7 furlong sprinters, but 6 is a little bit too short for them. I'm not saying that this horse can't go 6, but we look at a horse who was beaten in nose going a mile at Tokyo in November last year. Now he's coming out of a very nice prep, or a very nice win in the Grade 1 February, where he beat Red Lazale, who I'll talk about a little bit later. But that was going a mile. So I think he'll sit a good covered up trip in this race like he sat in a couple of his other races. I think there's going to be speed in front of him. There's going to be speed from Gunite. There's going to be speed from Sibelius, possibly also speed from Hopkins. I'm not sure if he'll be able to keep up with them, but there'll be speed from those 3 horses. So you're not going to have them loping along on the front end, not doing anything. So that certainly helps Lemon Pop in his corner. But I want to mention another Japanese in this race. Last year, it was Switzerland who ran first with Red Lazale second. I mentioned I want to talk about Red Lazale. Red Lazale ran a very good second place effort behind Lemon Pop in that race at Tokyo. Now, the reason why I'm not concerned about the mile or about the 6 furlong trip for Red Lazale here is because Red Lazale was second behind Switzerland in this race last year. Carries in some really good form. After that, had a bit of a break, ran in a listed race back in Japan, but he won that in good fashion, beaten behind Dancing Prince in a local listed race in November, and then took that into a good second in the February stakes at Tokyo. So I think the Japanese are bringing some strong form into this race. Lemon Pop obviously makes a lot of sense. And for a horse like Lemon Pop and also Red Lazale, who will be coming off the pace, like I said, I think there will be speed into them in this spot. I also want to mention CZ Rocket, just because there's going to be speed in here. I think it's possible that CZ Rocket could pick up a piece in there, but I'm going to look towards Japan, Lemon Pop, and Red Lazale. Ultimately, I'd swallow the concerns with Lemon Pop because I think that because I think that the talent might just carry him through, and there is the speed factor from Sibelius, Gunite, and probably to a lesser extent Hopkins. We'll move on now to maybe my favorite race on this card. I still haven't decided whether or not I like this or the Sheema Classic more, but this is a very fascinating race. Favored right now is Deuce, the Japanese Derby winner from last year, but this is another favorite that I don't love. This is, and for another very similar reason, this horse is cutting back in trip. Now, if we go back to his runs as a 3-year-old last year, he was beaten a couple of times going 1.25 miles in graded stakes in Japan. And if we go back to his run in the Japanese Derby, this is a horse who needed every yard of the 1.5 miles to win. He won by a neck there over Equinox, who it's actually, it's certainly flatters his form that he was beaten there, that he beat Equinox, who right now is favored in the Sheema Classic. But I just think he needs to trip. If you go back and you watch his Japanese Derby, this is a horse that needs 1.5 miles. I don't really understand why he's cutting back in this race for 1.1 miles. I wonder if the Japanese connections in this spot might be a little bit afraid of some of the other horses that will be running in the Sheema Classic, but it just doesn't make sense for me. Last time out, he won going 1 mile and 3/8, which doesn't indicate that this is a 1.5 mile trip horse for me. So I'm going to be against him in this spot. Serifos, the champion mile horse in Japan last year. He won that mile championship race in a very strong fashion last year, closing into it very well. And he looks like a horse just the flip side, that getting an extra furlong isn't going to be the worst thing for him because he was closing late, won by 1.25 lengths, but he made a great closing move toward the end of that. I encourage if you can, to go take a look at that replay. It was a very entertaining replay, the move to close up the race that he made. So he's threatening here, but I'm going to go to the usual suspects in this race. Charlie Appleby, but not William Buick. I'm going to go to Master of the Seas and James Doyle in this race. Now, Master of the Seas last start out prepped in the Jebel Hada. The Group 1 there that was won by the Group 1 locally that was won by Al-Farik. I'll talk about his effort there in just a moment, but this is a horse whose career was kind of derailed after getting pulled from the Breeders' Cup Mile as a gate scratch and then missing a bunch of time. He was gelded, didn't run until after that Breeders' Cup until one race at Newmarket, which he won to his credit, and that was going this 1 1/8 trip. And then he had even more time off, didn't run again until a Group 2 at Maidan, going 1 mile, which again he won, and then siphoned those runs into that run in the Jebel Hada last time out, where he was beaten half a length by Al-Farik and El Drama. The problem with that in this race with Master of the Seas was, I think not necessarily a problem, but I think Master of the Seas ran the best race in the Jebel Hada. Al-Farik kind of tripped out there. He was able to get a very nice trip, he didn't save a ton of ground, but he wasn't as wide as Master of the Seas was. Master of the Seas may have been widest of all in that race. I can't remember whether he was exactly widest of all. If there was one horse that was a little bit further or a little bit wider than he was. But point is, Master of the Seas was very wide in the Jebel Hada, giving up a lot of ground to Al-Farik. He made a great run late, just ran out of time, was beaten a half length in there. But I think that this 1 1/8 trip, assuming that he can save a little bit of ground there, isn't going to be the worst thing for him. So you got two horses in this race in Master of the Seas and Serifos for Japan, who both close very well. Master of the Seas is going to be my main choice in here. I want to mention Nation's Pride. I don't love another factor that I'm bringing this up. I don't like the cutback for him. I think that this is a 1.25 mile horse. And I don't, again, probably Charlie Appleby, I can understand him playing dodgeball here, but I think that this is a horse that's better at 1.25 miles to 1.5 miles. He won very well, I thought, when he won the Dubai Millennium at Meydan in February, but I think that this is a horse that needs that 1.25 mile trip. So I'm going to be against Nation's Pride here. I'm going to go to Master of the Season, James Doyle, to get the win in this spot for Charlie Appleby. We'll move on to the next race, which is a very exciting rendition of the Dubai Sheema Classic. I referenced Equinox earlier. After being beaten by Dudus in the Japanese Derby. Had some time off, but won the Tenosho Autumn Grade 1, and then won another Grade 1. I'm not going to try to pronounce that race. So 2 subsequent Grade 1s going 1.25 miles and a bit farther than this 1.5 mile trip. And this is a horse that absolutely needs this trip. But I'm not sure that he's the best Japanese entrant in this race. I really like Shahryar and I really like Win Marilyn. Win Marilyn, I'll start with her first. She was running against the track in the Hong Kong Vase. Botanic, among the other horses that were setting the pace in that spot, were making it very easily. And Win Marilyn had to give up ground and close into what was a pretty slow pace in front of her. She won in a very strong fashion over Botanic in that race. Now, I don't think Botanic is the greatest horse. I thought that would be the opportunity to get him if you were going to get him in a Group 1 race. So that's why I'm not in love with Win Marilyn, but she ran a very strong race there, and I am expecting her to run another good start here at Meydan. I just don't know that that's going to be a winning formula for her. The other thing that I will say is you look at her races before that, 1.3 miles, 1.25 miles, 1.25 miles, 1.25 miles. You know, the 2 ones that she was actually competitive in, those were, she was beaten both less than 2 lengths in those. So probably also a horse who needs 1.5 miles. But I'm going to focus in on Shahryar here because I think Shahryar is a very strong bet to win this race for a second time. Let's go back to last year. Let's go back to 2021. This is a horse who was beaten by Contrail and Authority in the Japan Cup in 2021. Takes some time off in there, goes into Meydan, beats Yabir, Breeders' Cup winner, and beats Authority, who had beaten him for second in the Japan Cup. Now, layoff I'm a bit concerned about for Win Marilyn. I'm not concerned about the layoff for Shahryar because I've seen him be able to handle it before. Now, post-Dubai last year, this was a horse that they ran at Royal Ascot in the Prince of Wales Stakes. I don't think 1.25 miles is Shahriyar's trip. I think 1.5 miles is purely Shahriyar's trip. And also, the way that the race played out, Shahryar needs stuff in front of him, which he got at Meydan last year in the Sheema Classic, and he definitely got that in the Tokyo or in the Japan Cup last start out. Now, off of a break from the Royal Ascot start, didn't go well against Equinox, and that's obviously the concern that Equinox has beaten him. But also, I really like Shahryar at 1.5 miles, and I really like the run that he had in the Tokyo, or in the, I keep calling it the Tokyo Cup, in the Japan Cup behind Vela Azul, who got an absolutely dream trip through. If it wasn't for 700 holes opening up and the entire Pacific Ocean parting, Vela Azul wouldn't have won the Japan Cup, and Shahryar would have won it. But even with Vela Azul beating Shahryar there, it was still a very strong effort from Shahryar, and he carries good form coming out of the Japan Cup into this race. I know that he can handle this layoff. I know that he loves this trip, and I know that he loves his this track. So Shahryar is going to be my selection here. I want to talk about a couple other horses in here because I'm excited about this race. Mostadov, I really want to know who's betting Mostadov at 6-1. And again, this is a horse that I've talked about on Racing Rundown. I liked this horse in the summer of last year. He was beaten behind Baybridge and Broome, who Baybridge Champion Stakes winner. And then Broome, I thought, could be potential Group 1, or Grade 1 success in the United States, I should say. But Arc didn't go well, and the specific race that I was kind of jumped off of him from was the Princess of Wales' Stakes at Newmarket, where I actually picked him to beat Yabir in that spot, and he very disappointed there. So it's really the Princess of Wales' Stakes that has pushed me off of him. The field that he beat last time out in the Nome Turf Cup in Riyadh was exceptionally weak. So I'm against Mostadov here. I'm not against Rebels Romance in this spot because it's difficult to be against him. He's been on a very nice winning streak, but I think Shahryar and Win Maryland, and specifically Shahryar, make a lot of sense in there. So Rebels Romance, I don't have anything against him. I think he makes tons of sense in this spot, but Shahryar is going to be my specific choice in this race. One final race, we'll go on to the Dubai World Cup. I think that this is very cut and dry for Country Grammar, so I'll look to give you specifically something underneath, but just one word on Country Grammar, 1.25 miles is his thing. We obviously saw him win this race last year, and I think that the big thing for him the rest of the year is keep him at 1.25 miles. That's the big thing. Looking underneath here, once again, I'm going to go back to Japan, but I want to talk about Algiers first, the second choice right now in the markets. Algiers, winner of the first 2 rounds of the Al Maktoum Challenge, passed over round 3 to train up into this spot. I think Algiers is a nice horse. I think that his wins in the local preps were good, but he reminds me a lot of horses like Capizano from 2019 and North America from 2018. You know, those were years where, now, the best horse is an American in the spot, so it's not a perfect parallel, but there's no other Americans in this race with a chance. There's one other American who is a 50-1 outsider. In those years, in 2018 and 2019, there weren't really strong American representatives, so you were able to see Capizano go off favored, North America be very well backed in those years, and I think Algiers is going to take a lot of money in this spot. I don't think Algiers is a horse that I particularly care too much for. I also don't love Panthalassa because I thought Panthalassa was barely lasting at the 1 1/8 in the Saudi Cup. This is a horse that I think would have been better off running in the Dubai Turf, but I understand after you win the Saudi Cup, it's very difficult to not, or to pass this race up and run in something like that, although John Gosden did it with Mishriff, so what do you know? Maybe you can do that. I think it's fascinating that Vela Azul is here. I don't know how he'll get the dirt. I think it's great that he's here, though, just to get as many Group 1 caliber top level horses that we have. We have the Dubai World Cup winner from last year. We have the Saudi Cup winner from last year, Saudi Cup winner from this year, Japan Cup winner. So even though there's not the American star power, and then also the UAE Derby winner too from last year. So even though there's not the American star power here, there is still some very good names in this spot. But the 2 horses underneath that I want to look to are Teo Keynes and Cafe Pharaoh. Cafe Pharaoh ran a very good closing third in the Saudi Cup, so he's a horse that I think is absolutely, I'm not going to say a lock to place, but this is a horse that I think makes a lot of sense given the way that he ran last time to place here. He hasn't had success at the 1.25 mile trip, but just given how he ran in Riyadh last time out, I think he makes a lot of sense. We'll go to Teo Keynes now. This is a horse who was very, very well backed in the Saudi Cup in 2022, and subsequently didn't run well there, but subsequently picked back up, was a winner, won a Group 3 or Grade 3 in Japan, and was Grade 1 fourth behind June Lightbolt in December in Japan. But I think Teo Keynes, this is a horse that has been consistent, and I think underneath is one to keep an eye on. This is not a horse that I think can win. I think that this is clear-cut Country Grammar lock in this race. I exited the Saudi Cup thinking lock for Country Grammar. That feeling has not changed. But I think if you're looking underneath in this spot, those are the 2 horses to go for. I think Algiers is going to take money. I think Panthalassa is probably going to take money in this market. If you're in the UK, I don't really know how to help you because I don't know how your markets are going to go, but I'm specifically looking at how they went here. I think that makes, that's pretty much how I'm going to look at it. Crown Pride, probably because the name familiarity will take some money. So with that being said, that's how I view all these races on the Dubai World Cup the Dubai World Cup night. We're going to have Racing Run on episode number 202 or 203, I think, this week. Going into these races, I'll talk about them with Eric, and we'll make what selections that we will have for them as well. I might have a preview for the Louisiana Derby, depending on how much time I have. We will see how that works out. Anyway, this has been Racing Rundown. We will see you next time.